What if I told you the US government once used a psychic to locate a downed nuclear bomber in Africa after all modern technology failed? Or that classified naval submarines have documented proof of telepathy deep underwater? Today, we are breaking down one of the most unbelievable, mind-bending conversations in Joe Rogan history.
So, like in Joe McMonagle's case, he was one of those guys that did search and rescue behind enemy lines. And he always came back. His team always found their guy, and they always came back alive. And so, well, where did that come from? Well, he used his intuition in the field to decide, let's not go down that road, let's go over here. And he was safe. So afterwards, when there was recruiting for people who had some abilities like this, they would ask people like that. Do you find, like, you're in combat, you never get hit? Okay, let's talk. The other thing, of course, is, did you ever have any experiences beforehand that suggests that maybe you had these experiences? Well, Joe did, and his sister did, too. So there suggests, again, some kind of a familial genetic underpinning for why people have these experiences. So I will continue the story because I'm going to intersect with this genetic part in a minute. So I'm at UNLV doing all kinds of interesting stuff. Somehow the New York Times learns about what I'm doing, and they think it's an interesting character story for a parapsychologist be working in Las Vegas, because Las Vegas is sometimes called the largest parapsychology lab in the world. You have a whole bunch of people trying to mentally influence more or less random systems, like they are all the time. So, okay.
That's an interesting way to look at Vegas.
Yeah. Well, it kind of is, right? You toss the dice, you want a certain result. Well, we do that in the laboratory, except we don't have a lot of money associated with it. I was able to actually get data from one of the casinos, the smaller casinos, and because the general manager was interested in what I was doing. So I said, well, could I get all the data, as much as you have, on jackpots for slot machines and also the table games? And a miracle occurred, and she said, yeah. So she gave us the data, was able to analyze it, and among other things found that jackpots happen more often and payouts were larger, and table games did better between one or plus or minus 1 day from the full moon, which, by the way, matches magical lore. I mean, all kinds of things are related to when the full moon happens, religious effects and all kinds of things. So I thought, well, that's interesting. More jackpots happen, plus or minus the day of the full moon. And so I said to the general manager, maybe this is something you don't want to tell people because they'll all start coming in the full moon. She said, yeah, bring them in, because all you could do with this information was lose a little bit slower, because everything is, Vegas.
Pretty rigged.
Yeah, it's not rigged, but it's set up in such a way that the odds are against you.
Yeah.
So you would lose slower. But nevertheless, you'd see it in the data. So there's something interesting. Okay, so I get to the end of my time at UNLV, and a new door opens. And it's partially because of the New York Times piece, that book that I had written at Princeton that nobody wanted to buy, I suddenly had publishers calling me and saying, do you ever think about writing a book? Yeah, I have one. So I published that book. That caught the attention of people at a organization called Interval Research, which was funded by Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft. So Paul Allen was interested in doing what he called developing the wired world. This would have been started in 1990 as a 10-year project to figure out, given that the internet was going to be a gigantic thing, what do we do with it? So this was people that were poached from Apple and from Xerox PARC and the MIT lab and lots of places. They brought 100 people together. And so I was invited to do a Psi research program there with a budget that was 10 times larger than I had at UNLV and a salary that was 3 times larger. So I thought, yeah, that's the door that I want. So at Interval, everything was proprietary because it was all leading into patents that would eventually create things. And so some of the things we take for granted now were developed there. I was there not so much to develop a psychic technology, but because a small percentage of the projects were considered blue sky. is kind of to make sure that everybody in the lab realized that we're trying to push the envelope hard in developing new things. And so it's always useful to have a couple of speculative projects around. So I worked on that. And then the 10 years was over in 2000. So this is all in Silicon Valley. So a couple of us then left to create a nonprofit, which we call the Boundary Institute, which would continue the research that we were doing. And then that lasted for about a year because there was the dot-com crash, and we couldn't raise money to keep ourselves afloat. I was invited then to join the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where I've been now for the last 25 years. So the circle here is, here I am in college and looking at this place, studying the frontiers of consciousness, and that's where I end up, and I've been there ever since. And no new doors have opened that have attracted me, so I'm there, and I've been having great fun at the Institute.
I interrupted you when we were talking about numbers being associated with targets, and you were expanding on actionable data. What was the most impressive thing to you that you saw that people achieved with remote viewing?
Do you mean from an operational sense, or
I mean, just for people listening, like what would be the most spectacular example of something that couldn't be achieved any other way?
Well, one of the things was actually admitted by President Carter way back when they found a bomber, a nuclear bomber that landed somewhere in Africa, which could not be seen from above because of the canopy of all the, and nobody knew where it actually landed.
It crashed, right?
It crashed. There was a bomb on board that they did not want anybody else to get. And so they asked one of the remote viewers. In fact, they asked several of them, but one of them specialized in location, which is very difficult for remote viewing. Like if you look at a map and you say, well, put a dot on the map of where it is, that turns out to not be very easy, even for remote viewers. But this one lady was very, very good at that. She was a dowser. In fact, she was a map dowser. So you get a big piece of blank.
You're saying dowser like those people that walk around with the stick to find water?
Yeah,
Okay.
Except map dowsing is you have a blank sheet of paper which is linked by association to an actual map somewhere. You don't want to give anything away, so you don't use a real map. You use a piece of paper which has little X's on it that map onto an actual map.
Okay.
So we asked this lady, her name was Fran, put a mark on the map of where this bomber landed. And of course, she doesn't know it's Africa. She doesn't know anything. She does her thing. She puts a mark on the map and says, I think it's there. And so they go there, and they find it within a couple of kilometers of that spot.
Whoa.
And so they originally go to that spot. They see natives nearby. So they asked the natives, was there anything crashing out of the sky recently? I said, yeah, something happened over there. That's where it was.
Now, what did Carter say when he spoke about this publicly?
Carter was asked a very similar question. Did you ever encounter anything really weird? So that's the example that he used.
Didn't Carter have a UFO experience
He
before?
did. He had that as well, yeah.
And Carter was, the folklore is that Carter was briefed about something having to do with alien life, and he was so upset that he started weeping.
Yes, I've heard those stories, yes.
What do you think about those stories?
It could well be true, yeah. I mean, so there's
Did
actual...
you ever hear a rumor of what he was told?
No, I don't know what he was told. If I had to guess, given that he was a very religious person, it probably was pushing against his religious beliefs.
Yeah.
That's what I would guess.
Well, that was the giant rumor that was going around recently, that there was going to be some big disclosure by the White House and that a bunch of pastors had been briefed about this to try to talk to their flock and get ahead of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You heard that, right?
Yeah.
What did you think of that?
It could well be true. So I know Jacques Vallée really well. And,
He's a fascinating guy.
yeah. And I know Gary Nolan.
Another fascinating.
Yeah, I've worked in circles where we basically all known each other for a long time. And the UFO business, UAP, is very similar in some respects to the psychic side, both in that there's an enormous amount of misinformation that has been pushed by government, by other places, to deflect attention.
Right.
And so there's lots of examples of that, which, I mean, because of what we know now about the UFO thing, it's relatively easy to see how that could have happened for the psi business as well. So just one example, I go to the Naval War College, and I've given a number of lectures, and one of them is on telepathy. How do we know that telepathy actually exists? There's a bunch of different ways of knowing that. And so afterwards, two sub-commanders come up. In fact, that's the story. That's the opening story gambit in my book, Science of Magic. So the two sub-commanders come up, and they say, well, we have a story to tell you. These are two independent subs. They're the commanders of two subs. So I'm telling them everything we know about telepathy, and they say, well, one time, and we're submerged, we're under maneuvers, a crewman wakes up from a dream and goes to the commander and says, we need to surface because something bad has happened at home. Well, we can't. We're under maneuvers. Next time we can surface, well, then you can call home. So the next time they surface, they call home, and sure enough, when the sailor woke up from his dream, there was indeed something bad happening at home. So both of the commanders had the same story. So I said, well, does this happen like every Tuesday? No, there were no false positives. It happened once, and both times it was correct. That's very important to know, not simply that it happens, but it is happening when the submarines are at a classified depth, which means at least 300 meters, probably more, below the surface of the ocean, where it's extremely difficult to get any kind of message there. So it's not electromagnetic. We don't know what that would be.
What were the events at home that were bad?
They didn't tell me the events at home, but it was
personal events, like someone's family.
Something in their family,
Okay.
something was going wrong, which turned out to be correct.